Is in chat room already. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out of Nowhere. Well, we've got a totally different show today. It's somebody I've known over 10 years, maybe longer. Her name is Rachel Gallagher. Um, I don't know if you're still doing Wanderlust, are you?
I'm not, no, that, do you know what? It'll always have a special place in my heart, but I've not been able to do it recently because I've had a little boy it's been nearly 2 years ago now. And I've been at university, so I've not really had time to do it. And I did have to put it on the back burner. So I'm a bit sad about that, but yeah.
Oh, never mind, Rachel. I know you've been completed a degree in psychology and now
Yes.
doing a master's in criminal justice and
Yes.
crime control. That
Yes.
sounds very interesting.
It is very
Full on,
interesting.
full on courses. I know on tonight's show you want to talk about domestic abuse
Yes.
and sexual abuse, physical abuse, lots of different things like that where people you don't realize what they go through.
No, that's
Um,
it. There's such a huge stigma around it, and it's a topic that's really close to my heart. I was in a long marriage. We were sort of married for 10 to 12 years. I'm 35 now, so I was very young when I got married and had children. And I just, there was always that confusion as to what a relationship was supposed to be like. You get the different perspectives from people of,
of course you
if
do.
if he's a bit jealous, then it means he loves you, or if he doesn't like you going anywhere, it's just that he loves you, and it's that whole perception that you get, I think, growing up as well, and you get people's inputs, and it can be confusing, but since I look back now, and now the knowledge that I have now on the subject, I look back at myself and I think I wish I could have had a word with myself, gone back in time and just said, this is dangerous and this isn't healthy. So yeah, this is a topic that's really close to my heart.
When you look back in time, I think I don't know, 50 or 60 years ago, maybe longer, when you got married, you was told to stay in marriage then.
Yeah.
In the 50s, 60s.
Yeah,
Once you got
absolutely.
married, you're in marriage and you don't leave.
Yeah, it was very much about keeping families together. And a lot of it's kind of based around the social security system that we have in the UK, and how the government sort of preferred to keep families together. So not only was it for children or societal perspectives, but you were also staying in that environment for financial reasons, and reasons of probably shame and embarrassment of leaving a marriage or a marriage failing, which doesn't seem to be as much the case nowadays.
Do you think it's because people talk and say, "Oh, them two are having problems," and da 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 da? What's going on there? Maybe
Yeah, so
go
I'll give you
into.
a little bit of a background to it. So in the 50s, it was actually legal to batter your wife, as long as the neighbours didn't hear. So if you were disturbing the neighbours, it became a public offence.
I mean, that's terrible.
And then we kind of progressed then onto having, you weren't allowed to beat your wife unless it was with something that was smaller in width than your thumb. So we've really, as women, I think people kind of put it down to and label it as a feminist thing, and all women are so sensitive and they overreact, but we really have been through some tough times, and it's only sort of in I wouldn't say it was 1984 or around that time where they only just made rape illegal in a marital home. So it was, if you were married, it was legal to rape your wife. And that to me is just it absolutely blows my mind that we were even in that position in the first place.
You know, there's Paige in chat room as well.
Yes,
If you
she's
don't,
watching.
yeah. A lot. I know people say that my ex made me believe there was something wrong with me.
Yes.
Why
Yes.
do people do that?
It's very common. I think the research that I've done around it, I've done my own research as well, but also looking at research that's contributed to domestic abuse. It's very much a form of terrorism. It's a way to gain control over somebody else or a situation. And it's very much like living with a terrorist who will use mind control, manipulation, and a thing that's called gaslighting, which is a term that's thrown around quite a bit nowadays on
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
But it's a very real thing. I mean, I don't know if you know the origins of gaslighting. It was actually a film. You must know the film.
Yeah, the gaslighter, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a tactic that they use to break down your perception of reality, which makes you more vulnerable to believing what they're telling you is true. So it's almost I mean, psychological and emotional abuse is almost the foundation of most domestic abuses, because that's a way to get in control, and to manipulate the other person. And it's only just recently that we're starting to see that emotional and psychological abuse is under that umbrella of domestic abuse. You must have heard of coercive control. That's a new law that came out. So they're starting to recognise that there's other things other than physical and sexual abuse that constitute domestic abuse.
There's been a lot of digital and online abuse as well.
Yeah, I
Just on
think
Facebook, flagging people off and
the development of technology is really kind of giving these people a platform to persist with that abuse, not only in the relationship, but also when the victim leaves the relationship. I mean, I don't like to use the word victim. You've got to be very careful with domestic abuse because people who have experienced it are quite sensitive to the terminology. So I don't always like to use that word, but
yeah.
when someone leaves the relationship, the abuse tends to continue, and that is quite common.
Yeah, it is, yeah. A bit about you, when did it start for you then?
So like I say, I was in a marriage for 12 years, and I noticed there was quite a lot of there was a power dynamic in the relationship. I was very much the one at home. He would be allowed to go out and do what he wanted, but there was a lot of possessiveness. So he was using my credit cards. He was taking out bills in my name. And then the aggression sort of started, the passive aggressiveness. And when he would drink, he would get it never escalated until it did after 6 years.
Yeah.
But it would be name calling, threatening me with my children. When he'd had a drink, he'd come home and he'd sort of call me names early in the morning while I was trying to sleep. And I just used to pretend to be asleep because I was just terrified. I was terrified of the confrontation. And when that didn't work, it would then escalate. So he would pull me out of bed by my feet or throw things at me. And it was just traumatic. And I remember being in a state of fight or flight all the time because I didn't know when the next thing was coming. So a long story short, around 6 years into the relationship, we'd gone on a night out and we came home and got into an altercation. I sort of tried to sidestep it a little bit because I could see that it was escalating. And he ultimately ended up beating me up. He threw me against the wall. He tried to strangle me. And then he left the house ran off and said that he was going to kill himself. So in that moment, I remember thinking I was more concerned about him than I was myself.
Correct. Yeah.
So obviously that was my first experiences of domestic abuse. And I think you find that a lot of professionals that come into this field have experienced it themselves, because it's so hard to understand unless you've been in that situation. I then went on to have 4 to 5 years in the Humberside Police. So I worked in the police, and I would visit homes of domestic abuse victims, and I'd speak to them, and I noticed a lot of the cultural misogyny that would go on within the police force. And one moment that I'll never forget, and it probably changed the whole course of my life, to be honest. We were sat in the patrol room one day, and a call came in. It was a Friday or Saturday night, I can't remember. And they were all eating Chinese at the time. And he turned around and he said, "Oh, it's them again." And I said, "Well, what, do you not think we need to attend?" Because it was a domestic incident.
Yeah.
"Oh, no, it'll just be an argument. They're always at it." And I looked back at the incident report from when I was married, and within them 6 years, I contacted the police a total of 13 times. And as I looked through the log, it escalated. So there was minor incidents, and it would build up to a more serious incident until eventually it became extremely serious. And at that point, I remember thinking, this is a bigger problem than just something that goes on behind closed doors.
So it must be in the police. If that's happened once, how many more times has that happened?
Yeah, it's this societal attitude.
Said, "Oh, I'll leave it. It'd be right."
Yeah. And I remember thinking, for me, I don't remember an officer coming to my home and saying to me, "This is dangerous. This is going to escalate and this is going to get worse, and you need to leave this relationship." That never happened for me. And I thought things definitely need to change. So it became a focus for me, and a way to not only deal with what I'd been through, but also a door to kind of help other people in navigating such a complex area.
Oh, yeah. I know you were saying, but you had a breakdown.
Yes. This is when we first went on, I think 3 years ago when I was first on.
Yeah. It was 3 years ago.
I'd left the relationship, and there was ongoing abuse for 2 years. He wouldn't allow me to come home with my children. So I was staying out on sofas and taking my children all sorts of places, staying over, because he had total control over the house. And it was a year after that, when things just started to settle, that I got made redundant from my job. And that was the thing that was holding my whole world together. Everyone has a focus, getting up and going to work and providing for my children. And my career was the thing that was keeping me going through it all. Because I lost that literally overnight, I just collapsed. I couldn't cope. I've never felt so low at any point in my life than that point, because I remember saying to somebody, "What is the point in me being here?" I didn't have a home to go to at that point, because it was all up in the air with my divorce. I didn't have a job. The thing I had to focus on was my children, and they kept me going. And that's when I started focusing on mental health, which led me into manifestation. I did do that for a good 3 years, learning about the universe and having that some sort of faith in a bigger meaning to life, which helped to refocus me, and it really helped me to get better. So you've got to have a focus in life. Definitely.
If you don't, just a narrow window where it escalates into something else completely.
Yeah, that's it. I do find as well that I'm a big believer in things happen for a reason. And you know, I think things happen in our lives that we can then use that to educate other people. I mean, probably 80 to 90% of the domestic abuse services out there is built from people who have experienced it. So I decided to do my degree in psychology, and with a view of pursuing it into clinical psychology to help victims of
Yeah.
domestic abuse. And throughout my degree, I remember thinking, I'm very much a questioner, Bob. I want to know the whys. I want to know everything.
Good.
And I
Good.
remember thinking, there's so many unanswered questions in psychology. There's no definitive answer. We don't have all the answers. And I'm very much one, I like to know the answers. I want to find the
Yeah.
answer.
I think we all do.
Yeah, so I did my degree. I enjoyed it, but ultimately, at the end, I decided that my main focus was going to be dedicating the rest of my life to making a change to domestic abuse and
Do you
how
think,
prevalent it is.
Rachel, do you think times are changing a little bit I know from a lot of social workers these days have been doing it 30 years, some of them. So
Yeah,
things haven't changed from when they first started out.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's very little education to social workers and people who work in that field on coercive control, forms of psychological abuse. And the irony of the situation is that a lot of these abusers are fooling professionals as well. So you find that the abuser tends to use the legal system and other professionals to further abuse the victim and further create more trauma, making them out to be, well, that's never happened. You know, I don't know why she's saying that because that never happened. And the basis of the law with coercive control is having that proof. You know, you're relying on victims
I
to
know,
move forward.
going back quite a few years, in Rotherham, them poor girls in Rotherham were sexually abused for years and years in and out. And
Yeah,
people at the top knew about it, but
yeah,
never did anything.
yeah, of course. And corruption is a huge part of it. It's just expanded my knowledge and my naivety as to where this all stems from. So I've been learning about global policy and the rehabilitation systems for perpetrators, the gaps in legislation that ultimately are I'm trying to think of the word. The irony of some of the laws that are in this country are
Yeah,
just unbelievable, because I mean the coercive control law, for example, is very much reliant on victims coming forward, which we know is hard for them to do,
yeah.
B having the proof, and C having the ability and the strength to go forward with a conviction. But
And
these
that,
people are so manipulative
I'm going to
that
say, because it's very difficult sometimes to get a case against somebody,
yeah,
because they'll have backup saying he's never done anything like that in his life. He's always been a good lad.
yeah, this is it. I mean, they not only manipulate the victim, but it's the wider family. I've heard of cases where the victim's family have actually taken the perpetrator's side because they've been that manipulated by them to believe that these accusations are false. And then you have the bigger problem underlying all of this, which is the societal views that we have on women and children and the gender imbalances that still exist today. It just underpins it all and reinforces that it's not being taken seriously. And the only conceivable reason that I can come to is that it's inbuilt in society. It has to be, because everything else makes sense. So why is
Do you
nothing being
think?
done?
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that with times changing, where people haven't got lots of money, more arguments are going to start?
Yes.
I'm not putting it down to that all the time, but you could be in a relationship. Times are hard, where money's tight. He might want to go out for a beer, and he's actually spending money, but it should be on food.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you've got you are right, Bob, because you have these external factors as well. During the pandemic, domestic abuse cases rose by 60%. We essentially told victims that they have to stay at home with their abusers. It blows my mind that there was no support there for people. I know of 2 cases of females that were murdered by their partners. And coercive control is a really interesting topic, because if coercive control is part of the abuse cycle with a particular case, you are 99% more likely to be murdered in that relationship. And when you leave the relationship, you're more at risk of being assaulted, attacked, kidnapped, harassed. This is inbuilt into these people. This is systemic. It's so insidious. Where do you start?
And another thing is, jealousy is a big thing in life, isn't it?
Yeah,
Especially with a woman and a man saying, because you're good looking, and you get fellas looking at you, and your husband or your partner or your boyfriend start looking, saying, why are they looking at you? Why are you
yeah,
dressed like that?
yeah.
That must
And
be
and
difficult for a woman.
do you know, you've just made a perfect point there, because a huge part of what escalates the problem in society is victim blaming. So we have this case where women are being blamed for how they dress, how they apply their makeup.
Mm.
Why would you go out dressed like that? Well, people are going to look at you. And it's removing that independence for women to express themselves freely without feeling objectified. And then that's being reinforced then in their own relationships. So it really is. I mean, it's just a catalyst of problems that are just enforcing this to stay alive, because it's just being fed and fed by social media. Things like you say, like COVID, economic circumstances, the recession causing more problems in, financial problems in the home.
Oh God, yeah.
And it really is a case of women's lives are at risk.
Well,
There's 3 women. I think 3 women per week are killed in the UK by a current or ex-partner. That's 3 women a week dead.
that's awful.
Yeah.
Now, how do we change it then? As the government, we've got to change the laws then.
Yeah, so we in 2020 the new domestic abuse law was released. That basically encompassed a definition for us to understand what domestic abuse looks like, and a set of guidelines for law enforcement and police and social services to look at and understand what domestic abuse is, which is a huge thing, because we haven't had that, where we've had these separate offences where we've had, he's harassed her for a little bit, and he maybe followed her one time. We've got all these offences and we've put them together in a pattern that we can recognise. So that was a huge step. And then just after that was the coercive control laws. They then came out to recognise a pattern of abuse that ultimately will end either in homicide, which is very, very common, or women taking their own lives to get out of these relationships. Currently, the women who do end their own lives from being in relationships like this are not included in the homicide statistics.
Why?
It's down as suicide.
Numbers. It's all to do with numbers, isn't it?
Yeah. It is such a dangerous thing because there's a woman called Jane Monckton Smith. She's a professor and she studies criminology in the realms of domestic abuse. And she developed a timeline that explains the pattern of abuse. She proposes that police need to use this timeline as a way to risk assess what's going on. So she went into prisons, she would interview perpetrators and victims, and she found that with every single case, the pattern of behaviour and escalation was identical. So we have the history of the perpetrator, the criminal history of the perpetrator is such a vital thing because that shows that they have internally agreed that this behaviour is acceptable. And that is something that will not change in them. So they are likely to reoffend and reoffend and reoffend. So these patterns, which we used to refer to as, I don't know if you remember, it used to be a crime of passion to kill your wife, or it was a crime of passion. Yeah. It's not, it's an obvious pattern that we are just missing because it's in the context of a relationship. You know, these things follow a similar pattern, and all these people who perpetrate domestic abuse have very similar criminal backgrounds for violence, domestic abuse related offences, and quite often these will escalate into, I think 30% of perpetrators who are coercive and controlling will end in a homicide. And also, of the 100% of people who have murdered their partners, 98.7% of them are male perpetrators.
Tell you another thing about...
And near enough 100% of the victims are female.
Oh my God, that's terrible. You know, tell you what, another thing about all this, about stalking somebody. That must be absolutely horrendous when somebody's following you all the time.
Yeah, there's been a lot of documentaries, hasn't there, recently about this?
Yes.
Yeah, it's become more and more in the public eye. It was more of an embarrassment, I think, for people to say that someone was stalking them at one point. And it was almost like a little bit of a joke, like, oh, is he stalking you? You know, he must like you. And it was seen as a form of flattery. But I think now people are realising the severity of stalking as a precursor to homicide.
Oh,
and
God,
I don't say this lightly, because a lot of cases where stalking and harassment takes place, they are I think it's 900% more likely to end in a homicide. So it is such a huge marker and such a red flag for high-risk abusers to do stalking behaviours and harassment, because that is ultimately a timeline where at that point they've lost control. So they make a decision, either I leave this person alone, or depending on the level of obsession and their personality traits, this would be a combination of, if I can't have her, no one can.
I know. I'm not saying yet. I've been in quite a few relationships in the past myself, and it's in your head.
Yeah.
I know.
I hear a lot of people saying, Bob, that I would rather somebody hit me than emotionally abuse me or psychologically. That's very common.
But lucky enough, I've never got into that. I've been emotionally upset because
Yeah.
the relationship has brought down. And then I try and look at myself and think, was it me?
Hmm.
Did I
Yeah.
do anything wrong?
I think
Uh,
because I have an insight as well into psychology, it's interesting to see that there's certain things that are natural in a relationship. So there's a certain level of reflection after a relationship ends. And we ruminate. So we'll sit and we'll think, actually, is there something that I did? Could I have done something differently?
yeah, that's
Am I to
true.
blame? And it's very dependent on people's personality types and their nature, whether they will leave a relationship and say, actually, I did nothing wrong. Or they might sit there and say, well, it was all me. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Um, and then you come on to coercion, which is it's a natural human response to coerce somebody back into a relationship that you love. I mean that is in no way, shape, or form abusive. It's when
No.
that coercion steps over into control and manipulation. That is when it becomes dangerous, and it's really hard to recognize, which is the whole point of why it's such a big problem.
Terrible problem. And it's not going to go away. Do you think some people get married too young without having a life themselves?
Oh, definitely. I think I think this is another concern is that the amount of, I mean, especially I see it with my own children. I have two teenage girls, and I see the level of coercion and manipulation that goes on in social media that's currently out at the minute, Snapchat and TikTok. And we know
Um,
teenagers, they have all these
yeah,
areas of social media. And it's absolutely astounding the level of acceptance of some behaviors in young relationships. There's for example, if I don't have your Snapchat password, then that means I can't trust you. I mean, that is such a level of invasion to your privacy that I think needs to be protected for your own autonomy in a relationship and your own like well-being. You should be able to
yeah.
have that privacy to vent and speak to friends about things that you wouldn't necessarily talk to your partner about. And it just seems to be acceptable. It's crazy. It's like we're going backwards with technology. It's
Yeah, a lot of
alarming.
young'uns out there. I know when I've spoke to lots of people about their relationships. They got married too young. When they got into their 30s, they decided to break up, and
Yeah.
the wife has gone on to do something she's always wanted to do, but never actually did it because she was married at the time.
Yeah, yeah. We're seeing, I think this is something that will dilute as generations go on. I'm sure of it because women are becoming a lot more independent and career driven. But there is
Well,
still that, you what, sorry?
yeah, they are as well because they wanted to go back to work. A lot of them in the 30s, they want
Yeah,
to to earn their own money.
yeah, of course, yeah, and gain that bit of independence. But we are seeing, interestingly, I don't know if you've been, if you're into politics or anything like that. I'm not particularly into politics, but it's interesting to know that we've had a recent rise in women that are calling themselves traditionalists. And they're saying like, stop taking our voices. We want to stay at home. There's nothing wrong with us staying at home, and we want to cook for our husbands. So it's very much down to personal choice. So it's, again, it makes it really difficult to identify those relationships that are unhealthy because some people want to live like that. They want to be at home with the kids and they don't want to go out to work and they're not career driven. So again, it just makes the whole situation more complex because of individual needs and wants. So it's really difficult to identify sometimes from an outsider what is a healthy relationship and what isn't nowadays.
But I suppose when you look back now, what happened to you, you probably learned so much now, but
Yes,
hopefully it'll never happen to you ever again.
I should hope not. we do have we have a thing at the moment. I don't know if you've heard of it, called Clare's Law.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a database on the police national system that it's basically a database of people that have committed violent acts or certain levels of violence that would be seen as concerning, as in more a personality trait that is
Yeah.
likely to repeat itself. Any domestic abuses that are reported against an individual are on this system. So if you're in a relationship, whether it be a man or a woman, because men, I have to say it, men do get abused as well. As much
Yeah,
as
they do,
it
yeah.
is disproportionate, it does still happen. And we do see it more as well in homosexual relationships where men are really badly abused by their partner. So, I mean, this is male and female perpetrators, and you can go to the police and you can ask for a disclosure on your partner or
Good.
ex-partner, and they will. There's three things that will happen. So you won't get a disclosure, and there's no level of risk there, or the police will come back to you and say, you know, there is a few concerns that we've seen on this person, and we feel like you need to know that, and they will give you a disclosure. Or, you know, the third thing that will happen is what we call a high risk response, when somebody comes to the police and says, look, I'm in a relationship with this person and I've got concerns about their behavior, or I've heard something about them that I'm not
Yeah.
sure, I've just got a feeling. You are then entitled to that disclosure, and they will sit you down and they will tell you all the offences that are relevant to violence, sexual violence, or domestic abuse, to safeguard the victim. So it's kind of a preventative measure.
That's a good thing.
It is, but at the same time, by this point, the victim is already probably in a very dangerous situation.
Mm.
So as much as it's preventative, you kind of don't start to pick up on those concerns until you've been in the relationship for quite a while. So we need something like a happy medium. We need something preventative. I don't know what that is, but that's what my aim's going to be after I finish my master's at uni.
Well, that's good for you. So you're looking to look into things like that for a lot of women, and maybe men, in fact, as well. There might be
Yeah,
men
of
out
course. I
there
mean,
what
domestic
do
abuse
get
isn't just
abused as well.
limited. Yeah, it's not just limited to romantic relationships. We see it in family dynamics as well. We see it between parents and children, and vice versa. You know, children abusing their parents, which my little boy does on a daily basis. He's only
What's
2, bless him.
when you look into cases? What's the average age where things start to go wrong?
Yeah, yeah, that is very true. A lot of people will say there is a few myths surrounding perpetrators and the potential for them to become abusive, is that they have been brought up in an abusive relationship, or their parents have been through
Yeah,
that. There's also certain, I mean, there's research around it, but it's not really a saturated area. It's a very small amount of research
yeah.
into personality traits. You know, different people with different personalities, how likely they are to become abusive. But I mean, ultimately, the goal is, I've been doing some research recently with regards to global policy, and we have obviously human rights, and we have ethics. You know, we share a level as humans. I think we share a level of ethical concerns when it comes to the safety of each other and humanity in general. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case in some countries, where things like this are still legal, and still very much normal practice.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, I can imagine so. Yeah, it's very difficult. So what's your future plans for yourself then?
So I'm currently obviously doing my masters. That will end in, I think, May next year. What I want to do is go on to do a PhD at Hull University. I will hopefully spend 3 years doing research in this area. I am setting up a blog as well, so I'm going to be
Good.
putting some. You know me, Bob. It's probably going to be controversial.
Well, that's brilliant.
Controversial views and opinions, but we need that, don't we? We need people to be controversial. So that's going
We
to
do.
hopefully be up and running by next year. I'm going to get Christmas out of the way first. And then I'm hoping to restart my podcast. So I did do a podcast on mental health when I launched my coaching business back in 2021. I was helping people through the COVID pandemic and their mental health and things just by sharing my practices. And it was a very successful podcast. And it's really sad that I had to stop doing it. But, you know, things happen and
Happen for a reason sometimes.
yeah, I've kind of took a different direction. So I'm hoping to restart that, start interviewing people, maybe looking at campaigns, you know, policy and where we go from here.
It'd be
Because
good if you could be a counsellor,
yeah,
like for underside.
sort of
You need somebody
counselling.
like you out there working in Umberside where
Yeah,
people could get in touch with you for advice and what to
yeah,
do and where can I go for more help? Who do
yeah.
I
And
trust?
it's amazing how people. I mean, you've got to remember these people are to some degree being isolated in their homes. A lot of them won't have access to computers. They won't have access to their own finances. Some of them can't even go out to the GP. You know, they're in such a dangerous situation that they actually don't know where to access this stuff. They don't know enough about it and they don't have the resources. So it's really important that things, you know, like Safer Lives, the charities and things that we have, that can pick up in between the red flags to kind of take these people to one side and say, this is what we can
And
do.
another thing as well, but a lot of people say, I didn't know what to, I wanted to tell you this and all. And you think, well, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
Somebody doing that. And they come and tell you later. And I said, why didn't you tell me now?
Yeah, that's it.
You
I
know,
think
we can talk, but they just don't, do they? They don't want to get involved.
no. And there is still that stigma in society, I think, with getting involved in people's relationships. We don't like to do that. It's a very
No,
British thing.
we
Oh
are.
no, we won't get involved in that. We'll just leave them to, you know. And oftentimes it's something innocent, and conflict is normal in relationships. In fact, it's healthy. But yeah, it's just such an insidious thing because it's not only is the victim silent, but the perpetrator also. So it's such a private crime. You know, there's only one victim, and the person that we're relying on to bring these charges and you know, stop this from happening is essentially being silenced. You know, and people feel a sense of shame, I think, around it as well. And if they've got children, they don't want to leave the relationship. Often they've got financial ties. You know, it's all these things we need to consider.
Going back years ago when you got married, it was like the husband can go out and have a drink with his mates, but you've got to stop at home.
Yeah.
And
It's
it's
very
funny,
much still that culture, I think.
a friend of mine met somebody online. Don't know why she did that. I've tried to tell us loads of times about that. And he came to live with her, and she was working in Umberside, so she didn't get home till 6. he came home at 5, but he came from a family where mother did all the cooking, and he sat there playing games on his phone, but he was waiting for her to come up to make tea.
Mm-hmm. It's very much replicated, isn't it? The
And
upbringing is
I
very
said,
much
why did you let that happen? No,
it's it's a strange one.
you're not. I'm
I
like, I don't like arguing. I think, oh my God. Anyway,
Yeah.
it didn't last long.
Yes, I
6
can
months,
imagine
and
not.
she had to book him out. It finished.
I mean, thank
But,
God.
but that's from the old school, isn't it?
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
it. There's also
years
another thing
ago.
that I find really interesting. I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but we're still very much in the dark ages when it comes to educating children on gender dynamics in a relationship. I have a little boy now,
Yeah,
so I'm taking a
lovely.
completely different stance to parenting to what I was with my girls. I'm
Mm.
very much like, independence. You don't need to be in a relationship. Not, this is not, people like me often get labeled as a man hater. But in my opinion, if that is the obvious problem that is going on, just because someone says that that's a problem, because it clearly is a problem against women more so than men, it doesn't mean that it's a dig at men. It's just a dig at the society that we live in. And so, I'm looking for Christmas presents for Hunter. He's only 2.
Mm.
And I went in a shop and I thought, do you know what? I want to get him a baby, like a stroller and a baby.
Yeah,
And even me being as, against things like, what society's like at the moment, even I felt really uncomfortable buying my son a baby in a stroller because of thinking, well, like, I mean, his dad said, well, he ain't having a baby. And I thought, why? Why? Like, we're not teaching our younger generation of men that, I mean, they're going to be fathers, right?
of course they are.
So why are we not teaching them the basic skills of looking after children? It's because that is systemically in society that it is a woman's job to have the children and to raise the children. I mean, we birth the children, but it doesn't mean we
Yeah.
have to raise them on our own,
No, that's true.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
and could I find a baby anywhere that was dressed in anything other than pink? It was just
I
a
know.
sea of
Difficult.
pink. And I'm stood there
And you
thinking,
and point about it, you worked in retail, so
yes,
you should know where to go, but it's quite difficult these days. Times
yeah,
have
I mean, it's
changed.
very much boys, cars, dinosaurs, the
Correct.
manly stuff. I mean, they have things like tool benches for young boys.
They
And
do,
then for
yeah.
girls, it's dressing up, making tea, play kitchen, ironing. I mean, we are making progress in this field, don't get me wrong, but we can do more. We can
I'm
do
sure
more.
we can. I'm sure we can. It's difficult. We were talking about, I'll just throw this one in as well. When I went to a holiday camp, then we didn't have a phone or anything. And I used to get mail sent to me. I used to have to go into office, see one of the girls behind camp, because I was a bar manager.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I've got no mail again. One of the girls at back of the counter was opening my mail and reading it. I didn't know until I found a letter being opened round the camp. Somebody came, there's a letter here, it's got your name on, Bob, but somebody's opened it.
That's terrible.
It was awful.
That's such
Anyway,
terrible.
the camp manager, I knew him quite well, and I went to him and I went, I think I know who it is. Can you stop it, Brian? I don't want to sack him. I just said, will you have a word? Because it could get out of hand, this, because she was coming round and knocking on caravan door
Oh, yeah,
as
see,
well. It was
yeah.
just getting out of hand, and I just felt sorry for her, really.
Yeah,
And
I do want to dedicate the last sort of 10 minutes
go
of
on then.
this
Yeah.
to expressing that, we need to address it because men also do suffer. What I've noticed recently in society is that because there's such a problem with gender balance, so we have sort of women kind of second class citizens. I know we've come a long way, but we're still kind of here.
Yeah.
And then you have obviously the male gender. What we seem to have done is decided that instead of building women up and stopping this thing happening, we've decided to start beating men down to our level. It's just crazy. It's a crazy concept, but that seems to be happening so much
Why has
more.
that happened then, Rachel?
Because I just think it's easier as a society to bring someone down than we find to build someone up. So, we have a lot of charities that are opening for mental health for men. I mean, this is such an underreported thing. There's men suffering so bad. And because of the views that we have on men being strong, powerful individuals, they're providers, they have to go out, they've got to deal with everything, they've got to protect. But then we're not giving them the help that they need to deal with mental health problems. And it is becoming more of a thing that we talk about more. But we can do more there as well. And I feel like we're just eating away at men to bring them down to our level rather than, women have become very aggressive, almost in a way to what's the word, sort of balance the scales, when that's not what we should be doing. We shouldn't be being aggressive towards men. We should be educating people and changing society gradually so that this becomes less of a problem. We can't beat the other side with a stick, which is what we have some of the crazy, I don't want to say crazy feminists, but some of them are, who are anti-men. We need to put them all in prisons. They're all horrible people. This is not what we should be doing. We don't beat someone else down to gain more value.
I
feel like that needs to be said.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, more to it as well.
Yeah.
There's more to come, I think. Like you said, it's difficult sometimes, especially, myself, I go into myself sometimes and then I think, why didn't I say that? Or did that? And why has it happened to me?
Yeah.
And I think, when you we talked earlier about when you break up, you think, did I do something wrong? What happened to me?
Yeah, you start to
And
question yourself, and
because I am a quiet person sometimes. I've got a nice flat now and everything like that. It's a top floor flat, but sometimes I like to be on my own.
Yeah, and we're all so different. Touching on mental health, just a little point that I think is interesting. I'm technically a qualified psychologist, right? But I feel clinical psychology is part of, if not the biggest problem in this field. Because what we tend to be doing, I don't know if you've noticed, there's more and more disorders coming out. We don't know how to deal with these things that we see as being not normal or doesn't, look like a normal mental state. So we like to put labels on things. We like to say, oh, you've got an attention deficit and you've got too much of that. And you've got,
and all that.
yeah.
Class and all that now with a lot of kids, aren't they? A lot of youngins.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like ADHD seems to be the new pandemic. That's how I refer to it, as a new pandemic, because we're forgetting that, and this especially relates back to domestic abuse victims, that it's not normal to behave in a certain way because of something that's happened to you. We need to stop telling women and children that they have a personality disorder because they've been abused. We need to stop labeling children who are living in domestic abuse environments, and quite turbulent environments, that they've got attention deficit disorders. I mean, you have to remember, Bob, there's zero evidence, scientific evidence, to back up the claims of ADHD. We have next to no evidence, scientific, that any mental health disorders exist at all. So are we just labeling and categorizing people? Is this a political stance that we're taking? Is this how we keep people in order? I don't know, but it's a stance that I've recently taken after completing my psychology degree, which is completely ironic because I came out of it thinking, oh, what did I actually learn? Like, we've got all these things, but we don't have evidence for it. It's just theory. And I started to think, you know what? I've been diagnosed with personality disorder. I got diagnosed with bipolar. What was wrong with me was a natural response to trauma. I don't need medicating because my body's responding naturally to something that's happened to me. And we need to stop categorizing women into these disorders, because a lot of them, you find that a majority percentage of these people with personality disorders and ADHD, and a lot of them are women who have been through abuse, sexual violence, some form of abuse, and we need to stop telling them that they're not normal because of their response to it. That needs to stop.
I know somebody like that as well. Strange enough. She said, I've been classed as this. I went, and then she told me a story about being beat up by one of her husbands. And I said, oh my God. I said, don't mean to say you've got that, I said, you've gone through a bad time. Yeah. Things are better now. You're on your own. You can get on with life. You're happy. You've got a job.
We need to start accepting that trauma, things like PTSD, just because you are suffering symptoms from a horrifically traumatic incident doesn't mean that you have a disorder. You are reacting. Your body's naturally reacting perfectly normally, by the way, in a survival mode to keep you from being hurt again. I just to finish, I read the other day that apparently there's a disorder now called rejection sensitivity disorder.
Oh my God, what's all that about?
I have no idea. I've never heard of it personally.
No, I've never heard of that.
I've never heard of that. But for me,
go on.
If someone is sensitive to rejection, that surely can't be a biological or neurological response. That has to be something to do with their experiences that they've had in their life to some degree.
Yeah.
So why do we have to clinically label these things? And again, it comes back to society, political stances, and needing funding for things to keep the NHS going. And if we don't diagnose so many people, then we don't get the funding. But
that's
resulting in,
Rachel, that's numbers again. That's a numbers game.
Yeah, it's resulting in a segregation of a very small population of people, majority women, who are being diagnosed with these disorders who in response, society is looking at the victims of domestic abuse and going, well, you're the problem. I'm not the problem. I don't have a disorder here. The person that abused me is the problem. I am reacting normally to that. And that's a stigma that we really need to get rid of.
Exactly. You know, we can go on for hours talking about this, because now I've got my own show. I can go on for 2 hours, 3 hours, anytime I want now. But so when you're going to start, is anybody wants to get in touch with you, where can they get in? Where can they find you? Have you got an email address or?
I have, yeah. So it's Rachel Gallagher. So it's on. I think it's on the screen. I don't know if you can see it. It's Rachel Gallagher 1989 at googlemail.com. I don't currently have I am an active student at the moment, so I'm obviously with me studying my masters, but I will eventually have a point of contact for research or advice and things like that. But at the moment, that's where they can reach me.
And Diane, a good friend of mine in the chat room, said, "Thank you, Bob and Rachel. I've enjoyed tonight's guest. Very interesting. Good luck with your studies and future career, Rachel.
Oh.
We need more caring people like you in this world."
Oh, thank you very much.
She's been to Bridlington, as Diane.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much,
She's been to Bempton with us.
You what, sorry?
She's been to Bempton with us, with me and Paul.
Ah, when you've been on your,
paranormal things. Yeah.
Do you know, I did find, Bob, that whenever I was in a low mental state, sort of depression or feeling a bit low, there was always more activity in my house.
Yes, there would be.
Shall I tell you as well from a psychologist's point of view?
Go on then.
So we have what's called a pineal gland in the base of your head, at the back here in your brain.
Right, yeah.
And that is what it governs our levels of consciousness. So it manages sleep, awake, anything in between. Okay?
Right, I need that, yeah.
And that pineal gland is also referred to as the third eye.
Right, yes, I'm with you there, yeah. Yeah.
So there is a theory that certain levels of consciousness or distress states can allow for other energies to come in and interfere with that. So hence why you have all the, you might sleep and have a sleep paralysis because you're in a certain level of energy where your body's vulnerable to that. I found that really interesting when they said it was also referred to as the third eye.
When you talk about psychic mediums and having some sort of mental problems, it's a very fine line.
Yes.
Well, people talk to themselves and they could be talking to spirit.
Yeah.
And because they're doing that, they get classed
because you've got schizophrenia. And we've got these tablets for you.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's just
so I think
people.
a very fine line between that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, from a psychology point of view, you have internal voices and external voices. I find it very interesting where the two between the spiritual world and psychology kind of meet. Yeah, I find that really interesting. So what makes people more vulnerable to that?
Yes, some people are more vulnerable than others. And others can get out of it and just get on with life, and others just can't cope with it.
Yeah, and there's also, I found this out when I was studying a manifestation course, that apparently, you might already know this. So, when people go like that to meditate, that activates your pineal gland in your brain, which allows you to access different levels of consciousness. So the vibrations of that noise activates different consciousness, which is why when people meditate, they make a noise. That was very interesting.
You see, very interesting subject. It is.
Yeah.
And, Rachel, thank you for coming on the show at very short notice indeed,
It's
as
okay.
well.
You know me, I don't mind a chat whenever.
I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was
I'm
nice to
sure,
speak to you again.
and I'll send you the recording of the show,
Thank you. I'm going to put that on my blog. That's going to be the
uh,
first thing that goes on.
and then you can put exactly.
Oh,
And
before I
and
go as well, my blog is going to, there's nothing on there at the moment, but it will be called, it is called It's Not Me, It's Her. And it's research into domestic abuse. And
brilliant! I like that.
okay.
Yeah, it
Thank
sounds
you.
brilliant. Thank you to everybody in the chat room as well. And you'll be able to listen to it anytime you want. It's on YouTube. So all you do is go onto YouTube and look for Out of Nowhere.
Thank you
And
very
it's
much.
be out there already for people to listen to straight after the show. Yeah, Rachel, it's been lovely catching up with you.
And you. And
It's
I'd
been
love
a
to hear
while.
any feedback or comments. I find it
I
interesting
will.
listening to
Yes, I
people's
will do. Yes.
views.
I'm sure Diane and there'll be quite a few people who might get back in touch with me. And I'll just say, I'll say, right, you need to get in touch with Rachel then, and you can have a chat.
Fab, thank you very much.
I've enjoyed it. Been
Yeah,
good.
and take care, won't you, Bob? We won't leave it
Will
as long
do.
next time.
I will do. So I should hopefully be going in hospital before Christmas. I reckon, hopefully, next 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
Well, I hope if I don't see you or speak to you before then, I hope everything goes all right.
I'm sure it's going to be fine. I'll be up and
If
about
you
in
need
no time.
anything, just
Yes, I
contact
will
me.
do. I
All
will
right,
do,
thank
love. I
you,
will
Bob.
do. I'll just finish the show.